Sawadee Krap, hello and welcome to another Victor Black Masterclass video. In today's video, we're going to be addressing the question, does using the drug Metformin inhibit your potential gains in hypertrophy? Okay, so let's get started with today's video. Now guys, I will be very honest here. I have been putting off making this video for a little while, principally because I've been waiting for a study to come out that's currently underway. There was a study that was started in 2017 where they're directly evaluating metformin's ability to augment strength training in seniors, which is right up our alley, as it were. And I've been waiting for this study to come out, hoping that we would be able to discuss this study. But quite bluntly, I keep getting asked this question, so I've decided to make this video now, but here's the caveat. Please understand, when the study details are available, I am going to make a follow-up video to this, and I will reserve my right to change my opinion, as anyone should, when we are presented with new evidence. We just don't have a great deal of evidence. I'm going to go through what we do have today, some fragments of evidence, but really, this study is the study that I've been waiting for. So in our cohort, in older men, how metformin can be used potentially to augment strength training, is a study that I've been waiting on for a good 18 months. So I apologize for the delay in creating this content. So, as I said, in the spirit of at least giving you some content today, let's make this video. And then, as I said, if I get that study data in hand, I will update this content for you. So, firstly, I guess what I'd say, I understand that this video is designed specifically to address one question and one question only, and that does metformin inhibit muscle growth or hypertrophic potential. So there are other videos in the masterclass that talk about why potentially we might use metformin, the overall benefits to use. There's a drug that talks about how we might leverage some of those benefits in due regard to fat loss or dieting or weight loss in the masterclass area. This video just addresses the regularly asked question, because and as we go through the content, you'll understand that this is a question that gets thrown up almost constantly by people. Does metformin inhibit our gains, as it were? So this is the intent of this video. If you're looking for more information of metformin, or you're looking for a source of pharmaceutical grade metformin, you can find those both on the masterclass site at muscleandiron.com. Okay, so as I said, there's a study that's pending that I am waiting for anxiously to see what the outcome from it is. I have my opinion, but I will hold my opinion until that study is presented. This video is basically going to address 4 questions. So the first one is, why do people think that metformin would inhibit muscle growth? Why would people assume that's true, sort of thing? And you'll often hear the statement quoted that AMPK is a negative regulator of mTOR. So we're going to get into that in a little bit, but just understand that there is a valid and rational reason behind why people would make this statement. I understand why people would say that, right? So we're going to explain to you why. Yes, that is true. Technically, that is true. But, okay, so I'm going to explain the but here today. And then we're going to look for, are there any applied science studies? So not talking about mechanistic studies here. Anything in the real world that basically looks at healthy populations that are using metformin as a potential augmentation strategy in this regard, and do we have any data to support the fact that muscle growth is impaired when people use metformin? And then finally, I'm going to give you my personal experience and my personal opinion on the subject of, does metformin inhibit muscle growth? And hopefully you'll be able to see when we get to that point that opinion is drawn from the science studies, the underlying science, and also the studies that we do have on the subject of, in healthy populations, is muscle growth impaired with metformin use? Okay, so Let's basically just begin the video with explaining. Yes, I am extremely empathetic as to why people would think that metformin inhibits muscle growth because, as I said, AMPK is a negative regulator of mTOR. Okay, so that just kind of makes absolute sense because if we're negatively regulating, then and mTOR is heavily involved in the regulation of skeletal muscle protein synthesis, you would make the assumption that, right, it's not a good idea to take a compound or to take a pharmacological agent that has that effect. That makes perfect, rational, logical sense, and this is why whenever you hear these discussions about this subject online, I have a great degree of empathy about, one, why people are confused, but even the people that basically are making those statements, why that would be confused. Now, bear in mind, what I'm going to explain to you here is, understand, I do not have a PhD in organic chemistry. This is not my area of expertise. I am, as I always like to say to guys, I am a bro that has tried over the years to educate himself. So if we have people that are watching this video and they have expertise in this area, please bear with me. I'm trying to explain this in layman's terms so people can understand it. So this may well be a little simplified for those with certifications in this domain, and that's fine. Please understand, you are not my audience. My audience are guys that are trying to figure this out, that are basically just laymen, and they want things explained to them in what would be the simplest possible manner that gives a valid and viable explanation here. So if I use terminology that is not 100% correct, please understand my motivations and my reasonings and my rationale behind doing that. Okay, so the first thing to understand is that AMPK isn't just a single protein complex. This is a very complicated discussion. All right, it's extremely deep when you start drilling down it. And I actually, to be honest with you, don't encourage guys to go too far down the rabbit hole with these types of conversations, because quite bluntly, you can get lost down the rabbit hole, as do many of those in the evidence-based training community. They just drill further and further and further down into the stuff, and as fascinating as it is and as complicated as it is, there's no really significant differentials to be realized by understanding this kind of content. So it's enough, in my opinion, to understand that it's not a simple discussion. All right, so I'm going to try and make this a simple discussion. As I said, bear with me. Basically, the concept is that AMPK is actually made up of three parts that are called subunits. Okay, so there's an alpha subunit, there's an omega subunit, and there's a gamma subunit. Right, and each of these subunits is a protein that comes in various shapes and sizes. But the point being is that it's not a single protein complex. There are many parts to this family of proteins. Family is not the right wording, but there's many parts to this family of proteins. So what we need to concern ourselves then is with asking the question, when it comes to AMPK regulation of mTOR, right? What parts of the AMPK family are involved in that regulation? That's the question we really need to ask ourselves. And this is a study that basically looked at that question. And as you can see from this graphical representation here, you can see that AMPK alpha 1, right, is directly related to the creation of muscle protein synthesis and the resultant outcome of hypertrophic response. Okay, direct relationship there. But the same isn't true of AMPK alpha 2. All right, so another subunit of the proteins in the AMPK family doesn't have an effect on muscle protein synthesis. All right, one part does, one part doesn't. So the question we need to ask ourselves, the rational, logical, practical question here is, when we take metformin, which one of these AMP activated protein kinase units gets activated by metformin? I hope you understand the rationale, the logic behind this, right? Is it the subunit that affects muscle protein synthesis and therefore hypertrophy, or the one that doesn't? All right. Hopefully you can follow the logic behind that. So this is the first study. There's multiple subunits in the AMPK family. Okay, again, family's not the right word, but let's just use that term. Multiple subunits. Okay, one of them is involved in muscle hypertrophy, the other is not. All right. Okay. So then, when we go looking for evidence to say, okay, so what do we know about metformin, and which one of these subunits are activated by the use of metformin, then we can start to look at studies. Now, what we would like to have, as always, is a somewhat more direct study that specifically looks at our cohort, which would be healthy individuals that don't have type 2 diabetes, right, that are using metformin, and that addresses this question. Now, there is no study, to the best of my knowledge, on that cohort. Right? The only study we have on this question is with the people who use metformin in an on-label sense, and that makes, hopefully, again, you can understand why that would be. Right? There are some studies on healthy individuals who don't have type 2 diabetes using metformin, but they're not addressing this question. Okay, so if we look at that group of individuals, right, and we look at this study, basically this is a study where they took a group of people and gave them a therapeutic dose of metformin for 10 weeks, and then they took muscle biopsies and looked at the muscle biopsies for AMPK activity, right. What they basically found was that there was a significant increase in AMPK2 alpha 2 activity, right, with the introduction of metformin. So that makes sense. Okay, you take metformin, there's a significant increase in AMPK activity, alpha 2 activity, right? But when we go back to that previous study that we were just looking at, okay, you can see here that that subunit of AMPK doesn't have any impact on muscle hypertrophy. Okay, so hopefully you can understand where I'm leading with this thing. Yes, it is true that AMPK, right, is a regulator of mTOR, right, and that's not a good thing. Okay, but AMPK is a somewhat more complicated subject than this, where you actually have to look at the individual subunits and the roles those subunits fulfill, and then the implications of taking metformin on those subunits. Okay, so the first level of discussion, it makes sense. Potentially, it would look that metformin would be something you might want to avoid, right? Because it has the potential to have a negative consequence of effect with due regard to hypertrophic outcomes. That makes rational sense. That's why you hear this over and over and over again. But when you lift the lid and drill down to the next layer down, and you say, okay, well, hang on a sec. AMPK is a little bit more complicated than that. There are, as I said, subunits that you need to consider, and the different subunits have different functionality and they have different roles. And when we look at metformin use, does it affect all of the subunits in the same way, or does it affect only some of them? You start to understand that this is a discussion that is, firstly, more complicated than what it might first appear to be. And then two, there isn't any really good, underlying, technical science, any mechanistic science that points to a reason that metformin would potentially be, bad for hypertrophic response. Now you kind of sit there going, okay, so if that was the rationale, if that was the logic, and you follow the logic between these two studies, then you start to kind of go, well, maybe that doesn't hold so much water anymore. Maybe there's a more to this than meets the eye. So what I'm going to suggest we do now is basically say, okay, so if that's the mechanistic science discussion, a little bit complicated, I understand, but you kind of have to have that. I've tried to keep that as simple as I can, right? Then what we would say is, okay, let's go out of the world of mechanistic science and pop our head into the world of the applied science world and ask, look, are there any studies out there that show when we give metformin to healthy individuals for the potential benefits of weight loss? Is there any studies that show that the administration of metformin had a negative consequence of effect on muscle growth? That's a rational next step, right? What actual applied science evidence is there? So if we start to look at the studies that we do have on healthy individuals where they're administering metformin in a manner to actually try to leverage the benefits of metformin that our group are using it for, and so not for the necessary for the management of diabetes, but basically for the many potential benefits of metformin for us. Then what you start to see is, well, hang on a second. In this particular study, where we saw that they basically administered metformin, they didn't change really anything else. And this is not a group that was setting out to, deliberately and intentionally seek out hypertrophic outcomes. These were just obese individuals on a weight loss study. So when you actually look at the data here, and we look at the process, this was a 10 obese patients that were given metformin, again, clinical doses of metformin. I think this was 4 months, if I remember off the top of my head. Yeah, I'm not exactly certain about that. I'm pretty sure it was a 4-month study. In this process, you can see here, not only did these individuals realize a reasonably significant body fat loss with no nutritional intervention going on here, then they also saw a modest, and I'm the first person to admit, this is a modest increase in muscle mass. Okay, so they went up 0.7 of a kilogram, which is not a huge amount, but you have to remember these people weren't training for hypertrophic outcomes. So again, when we start to look at healthy populations given metformin in a controlled environment, are they going backwards? Well, not only they're not going backwards, but they've actually added a little bit, on average, added a little bit of skeletal muscle with no other intention. There's no steroids going on here. There's no dietary modifications in order to stimulate muscle protein synthesis to potentially push that forward. This is just one variable and one variable only, the addition of metformin into their lifestyle. And it's not only resulted in a reduction of body fat, but a very modest increase in skeletal muscle mass. So this doesn't support the idea that muscle gain, right? Even from an unintended audience. This is, as I said, not a group of people seeking hypertrophic outcomes, right? There's no consequence here to these individuals, okay? So then what we would do is go, okay, so if that is true, then as I said, do we have any study data that actually specifically looks at this question of metformin and the augmentation of strength training? And as I said, there is a study pending. So I will give you an update on this when the data from that study is published. As I said, I have my beliefs about what that data is going to mean, but at this point in time, it's too early to say, and this is why I've been holding off making this particular video. So let me give you my personal opinion and my personal observation about the use of metformin. I am, as I said, all about, as people know, I'm about outcomes, seeking outcomes in the safest way possible, right? So if there was a rational, logical connection between the introduction of metformin and a significant reduction in progress, either with myself or with my clients, I'll be honest with you, I would be the first person questioning whether that's a good idea or not, all right? Because I'm not just here for quote unquote health. I'm interested in outcomes. Yes, I would like to think we could do both together, all right? But if there was a compound that I was taking that was seriously inhibiting my ability to progress, or seriously inhibiting my client's ability to progress, then I would very quickly question whether we're going to use that or not, right? And it is my experience, yes, it is observation, yes, it is anecdote, and yes, it is one man's opinion, that I've never seen that. Most of my clients are older men. I mean, guys that are so old, in their late 40s, 50s, even 60s, that most people would say you can't build muscle tissue at that age. You're too old. The best you can do is try and hang on to what you've got. And we regularly are adding significant gains to our lean body tissue with the use of metformin as part of our protocol. So I certainly haven't observed that in practice. I'll be honest with you, even if I was to see, like a study data that came out that said, look, these are the benefits of metformin. It's a product that has anti-cancer properties. It's a product that has benefits of cognitive function. Of course, we know about the blood glucose modulation and management process. insulin resistance, etc., etc. Even if someone came back and said, look, they showed that there was an inhibiting of 5% of the potential for hypertrophic gains, but you've got all these other benefits, I'm not sure they would stop taking it, quite bluntly, because you have to weigh the benefits, right, against the cons. So if you were not interested in those other benefits, cognitive function, anti-cancer properties, blood glucose modulation, and it was just a drug that you were taking that was inhibiting your gains by some small margin. Let's just say that was potentially true, and it came out in evidence later on. I'm not sure that I wouldn't stop taking it then. That's a decision that you have to make personally. For me, it is simply not plausible that metformin stops you growing muscle. That's just not true. It's not true in the evidence that we have on the subject, and it's not true in my experience. This question would be, is it diminishing your potential? This is a valid and viable question, which I am open to seeing any new evidence that comes to light on the subject. But I want guys to understand the takeaway from this, and that is not in a profound way. All right? There's no underlying mechanical or mechanistic research that supports that. They're basically talking about AMPK is a negative regulator of mTOR. Yes, agreed, but understand, but. Okay, so that takes that off the table. Agreed, but, right? So what do we have in applied science studies that supports this idea? I haven't seen anything that uses metformin in a healthy population that stop people growing muscle. I've never seen anything. And in personal observation myself and with my clients, I've never seen anything that says that. And as I said, there's a list of benefits of using this compound, if you're interested, that you can see in my initial one-on-one primer on metformin. I go into great detail about the many potential benefits, particularly as we age. It's the next great anti-aging drug, in my opinion. So that's my opinion about does metformin inhibit your gains? As I said, I will make a follow-up video to this on any additional study data that comes out. If you're looking for a source of pharmaceutical grade metformin that you can buy from a legitimate online pharmacy, visit the website, and there's a link there that you can basically place your order for metformin or HCG or any of the other ancillary compounds. That site doesn't sell steroids, so if you're looking for steroids, that's not going to help you out. It's a legitimate online pharmacy that can help you in this regard. That's it for another masterclass video. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Victor Black masterclass. Sawadee Cup.